Jesus, but can we just give Marcus a hand as well? Amen. That God has given him such a beautiful gift, and I'm a guitarist. I love playing guitar, and I just wish I had that thing. I just wish I had that beautiful thing, that gift of But we all have our different gifts. It's really funny. I've been leading worship in my local church, and when I do that, it's so funny. If you put me in front of a group of people, it almost doesn't matter the size. It can be several hundred or several thousand, and I just feel no anxiety. I feel great. I've been doing it for years. I love it, in fact. I look forward to it. But this really funny thing happens when you put me in front of my local church, the same church I stand up and preach in every Sabbath or many Sabbaths out of the year, and you put a guitar around my neck. Oh, man, my palms won't stop sweating. I've got sweat pouring out of my arms. I can't remember a G chord. I can't remember 3/4 time. I can't remember. I just like, and I love it. I tell my church, I say, man, I love being super uncomfortable and feeling out of sorts. It's really good for me. And my church, they'll always be like, we love it when you lead worship, Pastor. It's so great seeing you. You're so human. Thank you? I'm not quite sure what that means, but they're like, oh, we just love it when you're up there. You just look so normal. What do I look like the rest of the time? I look very robotic and abnormal. So anyway, absolutely love what you do there. What we're going to do now in Story Time with Pastor David is we're going to look at just four instances of how to communicate the story of the gospel in ways that are trying to build bridges where walls exist. How do we come close to the people? How do we do what Paul did in Athens, and then what he did in Lystra, and then what he did in Antioch, and what Jesus did on the seashore, or when he was speaking to the centurion or at the well? How do we do that? And I'm going to tell you some stories here. I could put other stories up there, but these are just a few of my favorites. And I'm going to start with the story of Ben, the local Baptist chaplain. Where I live in Australia is about an hour and a half south of Brisbane. And it's a really lovely place, if you've ever been to Australia, called the Gold Coast. And I live on this very southern end of the Gold Coast, and it's a very middle to upper middle class, largely white, very Australian place. There are places you can go in Australia where there's a little more ethnic diversity, but where I live, it's what I call a white wasteland. It's just lots of white people. Which is why it's really great to be here and to see brown people and dark people and tan people and a few white people as well. I don't mind you. But where I live, it's amazing how when you're away from cultural diversity, and you just forget how much you value it. In fact, one of my favorite things is when Australians will say, hey, let's go get some Mexican food. I'm always like, all right. Because there is no like Latin Mexican influence there. And so you go out to get Mexican food, and you're just like, yeah. You know, it is edible, but it's not Mexican. And anyway, it's really sweet. I have a t-shirt that says, your ego is not your amigo. And when I wear that in Australia, on 2 occasions, I've had a native Australian say, oh, mate, what's an amigo? So that's all you need to know about what Mexican food tastes like in Australia. Okay, are you with me? All right. So the area where I live, about 15 minutes to the north of me, is a large Baptist church there that runs a very large school, probably the largest Christian school in my area. It's called Hillcrest School, and it's a school that's really known in the area that I live in for having a high reputation. It's a good private school, fairly expensive, good academics, and it's considered just a good school that lots of middle and especially upper middle class people send their children to this school. Good private education, good principals, good standards, beautiful uniforms. It's really a nice school. So shortly after my arrival in in Australia, I met my local church members there, and one of my local church members was a lady by the name of Carolyn. And Carolyn is energetic, she's enthusiastic, and she's the kind of person that gets stuff done because she's just not going to stop until it gets done. So she's in my ear shortly after my arrival. I teach at the school at Hillcrest. We have lots of kids. I have this incredible chaplain. His name is Ben. You need to come. You're going to love him. I've told him that you need to come and speak to the students. She's in my ear. All the time. Yep, broken. Yep. Okay. Well, she's similarly in Ben's ear. Oh, I've got this new pastor. He's from America. He's absolutely incredible. You're going to love the way he teaches. He's amazing. He needs to come speak to our. So one day, I get the phone call from Ben. And Ben's like, hey, I'm Ben. I'm the chaplain here at Hillcrest. And I'm like, hey, Carolyn's been talking to you. He's like, yeah, Carolyn's been talking to me. I say, yeah, she's been doing the same to me. We have a little laugh. So he invites me to come to Hillcrest, but he's no dummy. He's not going to invite some new, fresh-faced American Seventh-day Adventist pastor to come in and talk to his 2,000 young people that are there at this, really prestigious school. So he does the smart thing. He says, hey, look, we've got an opportunity, an opening. Would you come and speak to our staff? He's no dummy. So I'm like, yeah, I'd love to come in. He says, yeah, we do like a little 15-minute staff worship. We do it twice a week. Could you come in, whatever, next Monday and do a staff worship? Yeah, I'd happy to come in. So I go in there and, all the sort of 70 or 60 teachers are milling around and they're getting their coffee and their lesson plans ready and they're making a few announcements. And then it's all sort of informal. And then the chaplain, Ben, who I met, hey, nice to meet you, I'm David. Oh, I am Ben. Hey, we'll talk afterward. So I don't know anybody in the room except for Carolyn, who's one of my local members, and these are a bunch of people I don't know. But I see these people as my people, right? Because I'm in a very secular country, and these people are passionate about Jesus, and they're trying to bring the message of Jesus to a very secular situation, namely Australia. So I see them as my people. So Ben introduces me, and I give a 10-minute devotional on the mark of the beast and on Sabbath sacredness. I'm kidding. Of course, I don't do that. So what I talk about, I bring in my skateboard, and I talk about the lessons that I learned from skateboarding about my walk with Jesus and how that has informed the person that I am today. When the little 15-minute talk is done about lessons I learned from skateboarding about how to follow Jesus, the teachers applaud. And then they all leave and go off to the thing. And Ben comes up to me afterward and he's like, I have never seen that before. Everybody was paying attention, and they never clapped. They have barely paying attention when I speak, he said. I've never seen that before. He said, I've had an opening, I've had a cancellation like a month from now. Could you come? Yeah, happy to come in. So I went in the second time. And I did another, just an informal talk, and it went really well, and they clapped again, and it was great. So Ben comes up to me all after the end of that and says, hey, look, I'd love to have you come in and speak to our students. Could you do that? So we scheduled that. And I go in and I speak to the students, and then I speak to the high school students. He invites me in a second time. I speak to the students. I speak to the high school students. I went and taught a Bible class. So now a relationship is developing, right? And after, probably I've been there 8 months or something, and I've spoken several times, those 2 staff worships, spoken at chapels 4 times, and did a couple Bible classes for Carolyn, for 6th graders. Ben pulls me aside and he said, hey, David, can I ask, can I just talk to you, real talk? And I said, yeah, let's have real talk. And he says, I love the way you teach, and I just love your emphasis on the gospel. I love the way you get the attention of the staff and the students, and thank you so much for coming. He said, now you'll notice that when I introduce you, I don't make a big deal about the fact that you're a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. I just say a local pastor. I said, yeah, that's fine and easy. And he said, but can I just ask you a question? I said, yeah, what is it? He said, I did a little research on you guys. By research, he means he Googled us. And he's like, can I just ask a question about something? Because he said, a lot of the stuff I noticed was similar, but he said, there's one thing at least that I noticed, and I'm just like, what's that about? And I said, yeah, what is it? He said, how is it that you don't believe that when you die, you go to heaven? He's like, that's our hope. That's the great hope of the gospel. I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me? Now, if this had happened 15 years earlier, maybe even 12 years earlier, I would have been like, yeah, I'd love to explain that to you. Let me just... I'm telling you, it would have been the perfect opportunity to give a comprehensive Bible study on what happens when you die and the falsity of the position that he holds. I would have really let him have it. I'm just being honest with you. I would have really got stuck into him. But when he asked this question, because there was a relationship there, and because I know he's a follower of Jesus and we're on the same team, I say these words. I say, Ben, what you and I believe is experientially identical. And he's like, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, let me ask you this. If, heaven forbid, something were to happen to me on the M1 when I'm driving home today, and I were to be in a car accident, what do you believe, from your sort of Baptist perspective, what do you think, what would be my next, what would happen? And he said, well, you would be with Jesus in glory. And I said, I believe that is exactly what I would experience my next moment. What you and I believe is the same, experientially identical. Jesus in glory. And he's like, oh, and I said, now the only difference is that you believe that happens immediately, and I just believe there's an intervening period that the Bible calls a sleep, but that period is a period you're not aware of, and the next conscious thought that you would have would be Jesus in glory. And I just think that happens at the resurrection, not immediately. And he's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much.
Wow. Amen.
You with me? Amen. Okay, now just a couple questions here. Did I in any way compromise the truth of what I believe? No. Not. Did I maintain the relationship? Yes. I did. And do you think I still get invitations? Yes. Of course I do. So I'm going to give you several tools to put in your toolbox. Okay? Here's one tool to put in your toolbox. When you're dealing with people who love Jesus and who take Scripture as God's Word, maximize similarity. Right? Find every opportunity to say what you and I believe is the same. Right? Now, in this case, I had to modify it slightly. I had to say, not what you and I believe is theologically identical, what we believe is experientially identical. We believe the same thing in terms of the experience. Now, I gave him the qualifier of, you think it happens immediately, I think there's an intervening period known as, the Bible just calls it sleep. I downplay that. I didn't deny it, I just said, the Bible calls it a sleep, and I just think that what you think happens immediately happens at the resurrection when Jesus returns. Yes, I agree. But the first words out of my mouth were, what you and I believe is experientially identical. You with me? So what I've done there is I've tried to employ Paul's Athenian philosophy of building bridges. Right? I perceive that you're very religious. And let me talk to you about your own gods and what your own poets have said. Okay? So that's my experience with Ben, the local Baptist chaplain, and that relationship continues, and it's great. Now I'm going to tell you a story about my interactions with various and sundry Jehovah's Witnesses. Many people here have had experiences with Jehovah's Witnesses. They're beautiful people. Okay, now let me tell you. I got this incredible church member. Her name is Melissa Burra. I've got a lot of great church members, but Melissa is one of these people. She's Croatian, so she gets what she wants. Okay, she's very strong, she's very enthusiastic, and she loves Jesus. So she's like, hey, I've got this great idea, because every year we do a big Christmas program. She's like, I got this great idea. I want to go around our neighborhood and interview people in the Kingscliff area and ask them what Christmas means to them, what's their favorite thing about Christmas, and what gift do they want for Christmas. We're going to interview them, and then we're going to use this, we're going to patch this all together, and it's going to be a part of our Christmas program. This is 2 years ago. And I'm like, man, that sounds like a great idea. And she's like, and you're going to help me. I'm like, all right. And Melissa, she gets what she wants. So I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to go. So we then will invite these people to also come to the program. So we make it a big community program. We invite people to come. It's a really cool thing. So I pull up in the parking lot, and one of the weirdest things about living in the Southern Hemisphere is that Christmas is summertime, right? So just get your head around that, right? So I pull up, and I can just see it. There's my production manager for my church who runs our video ministry, Jono Nylon there. And he's got the camera, and there's another cameraman there, and Mel is standing there waiting for me. I pulled up just a little late, and she's wearing this ridiculous, headband with little, elf ears that is like flashing lights. And she's holding a Santa Claus hat that's like 6 feet long. It's like this giant Santa Claus hat. And as soon as I see that, I'm not really a Christmas guy. I've never really been super into Christmas. We don't really do much with Christmas in my home. And I'm definitely not into the Santa thing. So I look at that hat, and I'm like, there is no way. Not even for Melissa am I wearing that hat. She's one of my best church members. I'm like, I'm not putting that thing on my head. Not going to happen, okay? Just what I need is somebody to take a picture. It ends up on Instagram. Not going to happen. So I go up to Mel, and she's like, oh, I got this hat for you, and I'm going to wear these ears, and I think it'll make it easier for people to talk to us. And I'm like, I'm not going to wear the hat, okay? It's not going to happen. She's like, no, She makes her case, not wearing the hat. Roll it up, stuff it in my pocket, we start walking around. But nobody really wants to talk to us, right? It's like, hey, can we talk? And they're just like walking away, right? And so we talked to maybe 10 people, and we got 3 people that we did interviews with, right? She said, put the hat on, put the hat on, put that, sure enough. I put that stupid hat on in the heat of summer, and then we talked to 10 people, and 9 will talk to us. So it's like, okay, if I gotta wear this ridiculous hat in order to get access to people, I'll do it. So I'm wearing my little hat, walking around, feeling stupid, asking people, they're videoing it, the whole thing. We're interviewing people, so here's what happens. We live on this beautiful beach, and we're walking down this beach, and I don't know if they do this here, but where I live, one of the ways that Jehovah's Witnesses get access to people is they set up like a little stand with their awake literature, their watchtower literature, and they stand there. Well, it's one of these situations where there's 3 of them there, and we're walking down the street, and they've seen as we're coming down the boardwalk that we're stopping people, and hey, could we just quickly interview you? And they've seen us. So it's coming. So now I know Jehovah's Witnesses well enough to know there is no way they're going to say yes to this. So the socially easy thing to do is just to say, hey, great to see you guys, and to walk by. But it would have been dismissive and kind of awkward as well because they see that we're stopping everybody, right? So me being the gregarious sort of outgoing person that I am, I'm like, hey, how are you guys doing today? And I start my pitch, right? We go, hey, we're doing a Christmas program at our local church. And I get 45 seconds into my little spiel, and one of them says, you know that Christmas is totally pagan, right? And I'm like, yeah, now I do know that. And so they start on their little talk, and I'm like, got this hat on my head, and this is not, like, yeah, I know about that. I know about that. So once they've sort of finished their little talk, I'm getting this lecture, and I agree with everything they're saying. I agree. Hey, Mackie used to be a Jehovah's Witness, am I right? And am I right about they're down on Christmas?
Yes.
Right? They're just like, I might as well be, it's just like, yeah, it's not going anywhere. And I know it's not going anywhere. So when I'm able to get a word in, I say these words because this is my go-to line when I'm talking to people who are Jehovah's Witnesses. I say, hey, look, I totally get it. I agree with everything you're saying about we're just doing this for church. I'm trying to do my best to recover. And then I say, hey, I know what you guys are doing out here is difficult, it's tough. I just want you to know I'm personally really thankful for the work of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now let me tell you, they never hear that, right? Nobody's like, hey, I love the work you're doing. Thank you so much, right? Just they don't hear that. In fact, my experience with Jehovah's Witnesses has been that they're often on the defensive because they're accustomed to being sort of made fun of and mistreated, etc. So when you say that, it disorients. They're like, what? What do you mean by that? So then I tell them my story. So let me tell you a story. I became interested in Jesus through the visit of Jehovah's Witnesses to my home. It's a true story. I became a follower of Jesus myself when I was 23, but when I was about 21, I was at my home, and just as there often is, there was a knock on the door. And I opened the door, and here's two. I remember I had my shirt off. Standing there without my shirt, these 2 young Jehovah's Witness men have come to my door, and they start talking to me, and they had a little red book. It was actually a really nice hardcover book that said Revelation on it. Do you know the book I'm talking about? They gave me this book, and so I said, hey, I'd like to ask you some questions. We stood at my door for 2 hours. 2 hours talking about God, about religion. I'm asking hard questions. They're giving, good answers. And I told these people, those young men were helpful, respectful, kind, and very passionate. And as I'm telling the story to these people, I'm standing there with my silly Santa Claus hat on. I'm telling them, I did not at that time become a follower of Jesus, but those young men and the way they carried themselves actually aroused an interest in me to think about God, to think about Jesus, and to think about the Bible. And so I've always been so thankful for the boldness and the willingness to get out there and get stuck into it. So thank you for the work you do.
Wow.
And they're just like, it always happens. I've done this several times, not always with the Santa Claus hat on. But the follow-up is always, well, then why didn't you become a Jehovah's Witness? But I know that that's where it's going to go, and my experience has been that, and some of you agree with this, many of the Jehovah's Witnesses that I've encountered, they're so accustomed to combative interactions that they're waiting to argue. And I know that if I stick around, it will become an argument of some sort. So once I've done my affirmation and I've thanked them for the work, I start walking. Hey, thanks so much. I know you guys don't want to be a part of our video. We need to go find some other people. And as I'm walking away, one of them says, well, wait a minute. Why didn't you become a Jehovah's Witness? I say, I was 21 years old, and that, it aroused my interest in Jesus and aroused my interest in spiritual things, but I actually ended up becoming a Seventh-day Adventist a couple years later, and now I'm an Adventist pastor. God bless you guys. Take care. And I just walk away, right? Because I know that's not the time and the place to get into that then. I've had enough of those conversations. I've done it wrong enough to know that when I get the opportunity to, here's another tool to put in your toolbox, to affirm and appreciate, I preemptively disarm potential hostility or competitiveness. Right? And so you take a situation and can I speak affirmation? If Paul can speak affirmation into the polytheistic Athenian culture, I can speak affirmation into a Jehovah's Witness person. I can speak affirmation into a Muslim person, a Hindu person, even an atheist, and I'll show you how I do that. So this is just one example of how, like if you're dealing with Ben, the Baptist chaplain, maximize points of similarity. If I'm dealing with somebody like a Jehovah's Witness who's ready to get into an argument, ready to go, to the mat, so to speak, I'm going to affirm and appreciate, so I preemptively create a culture in that conversation of affirmation and not of argumentation. Now let me tell you a really good example of this. So I've got a young man who I met about 4 years ago. He came to Arise. His name is Akil. He's Indian. He was born, I believe he was born in Australia, but shortly after he was born, his mom, who is a Hindu, moved with her husband, who was a Hindu, to Australia. Akil had become a follower of Jesus, and shortly after that, about a year later, within a year, he came to Arise. Okay, so he came to Arise, told me his story, had an incredible story, great big tall guy, beautiful human being, incredible head of hair, beautiful guitar player. I love him. I just love Akil. He's amazing. And Akil went to the Arise program, and then did what we call Arise for Life, which is like a year of sort of ministry. Knocking on doors, meeting people, giving Bible studies. And so Akil comes to me one day and he says, hey, David, my mom is coming up. She lived down in Sydney. He said, my mom is coming up to visit me, and I know you love Indian food. My mom's going to make up a big feast, and she'd love to meet you. Would you come? And if it involves Indian food, the answer is yes, for me. So I'm like, yes, because it's the best food on the planet, from my perspective. So I'm like, yeah, I'd love to come. But I'm a little nervous because Akil kind of cues me up here a little bit. He's like, hey, look, I really want my mom to meet you, but, I've become a Christian, and she knows that I went to your school, and she knows you've been a big influencer in my life, so, kind of be on your best behavior, right? That sort of thing. So I'm like, yeah, no problem, happy to go. So we go there, and it was me and my wife. I purposely brought my 2 kids to create more of a social environment. Akil's there. Our friend Robbie Morgan is there. Robbie's sister is there, and Suparna. Okay? And so we sit down, and first of all, the food was incredible. I mean, it's just like, whoa. Yes. So we eat this incredible meal, and we're just having a lovely conversation, all the small talk stuff, right? But there's I can sense a little something in the air. Nothing big. We're just having a lovely conversation. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about Suparna. Suparna is a clinical psychologist. She is a lecturer at one of the big universities in Sydney. She is an upwardly mobile, high-capacity, high-value person, okay? She's educated. She's a high-value person, and she sees Akil as similarly high value, but she's maybe a little concerned that Akil's lost his way, kind of doing this Christian thing, sort of being waylaid in his academic pursuits. So I'm going into a potentially hostile situation. But she's conducted herself so wonderfully and so sweetly and so nicely. When we sit down after the meal, just to have just a conversation, I say to her, Suparna, I know a little bit about Hinduism, but I don't know a lot. Can you just help me to better understand what it is that you believe? Now, a really fascinating thing happens when you do that. I know this will be hard for some of you to imagine, but I'm actually a really good listener, right? I can shut up. It's possible. And what I mean by a good listener is, I'm not just waiting for my opportunity to talk. I can listen and ask questions of clarification. Oh, so was that before or after you came to Australia? Okay, it was. And then you went to Brisbane first and then Sydney? That was, okay, gotcha. Keep going. So you're asking questions of clarification, you're listening, you're nodding your head, you're just, This is how you listen actively, right? You're sending those signals, I'm listening and I care about what you're saying. So what happens is, in the course of this conversation, because I'm showing myself to be a genuinely interested person, By the way, people have said to me, how do you remember names so well? The answer is I prayed about it. I prayed about it. I prayed, hey, Jesus came to a tree and said, Zacchaeus, come down. I want to have dinner tonight at your house because I heard your wife makes really good food. Didn't say that, but I'm sure that's what it was. I said, hey, if Jesus can remember names, that's important, and people love it when you remember their names. So God help me to remember names. And ever since, I've been able to remember people's names pretty well. And so one of the keys is sort of engaging with people in a way that they feel valued, right? If you ask the question, listen for the answer, right? So yeah. So I know this, again, it'd be hard for you to believe, but in this part of the conversation, Suparna is doing 90% of the talking, and everybody's listening. She's telling her story. As she tells her story, first of all, she's a beautiful, lovely person. Very intelligent, very articulate. She tells a story of how she came from India. She was raised in a Hindu context, and she starts talking about Hinduism as if she's not committed to it. So she would say things like, well, Hinduism teaches, and Hindus believe. So she's just very subtly distancing herself from the way she was raised. Then in the conversation, as she starts to talk about her divorce, she starts to cry. If somebody starts crying in front of you, they trust you, generally. So there's something's happening there, and she reveals to me, I can just tell, I'm just picking up on the cues within the conversation, that she does not find the answers that Hinduism is offering as entirely acceptable. She's still sympathetic to Hinduism, she still identifies as a Hindu, all of that is clear, but she's not like, absolutely everything's a certain way, cut and dry. So then I go to, this is a very important tool in your toolbox when you're dealing with an unfamiliar worldview. And it's this question right here. At some point in the conversation, as she's talking, I say, Suparna, can you help me to understand from a Hindu perspective, what do you see as like the primary problem that's facing the world today? And from a Hindu perspective, what is that solution? Okay? So I call this the primary problem, primary solution tool, and it's extremely helpful in trying to understand an unfamiliar worldview. You can ask that of an atheist, you can ask that of a Muslim, you can ask that of an agnostic, you can ask that of anybody. You can ask it of, you just say, hey, from your sort of worldview, what's the big problem that the world is facing, and how do you understand that solution? She gives a great answer, but I notice even here that as she's giving the answer, she's distancing herself from the answer as in, this is what I believe, and more, this is what Hinduism teaches. I'm detecting that. I also then begin to transition and talk to her about Akhil's journey, and as a part of that transition, we're now an hour and a half into this part of the conversation, we're 3 hours into the evening. There's candlelight, we're just sitting around, it's conversational, we got an incredible meal in our stomach, and Suparna has been really open, vulnerable in the conversation. It's been great. And so when it was socially appropriate, I say to her, Suparna, your son has become a Christian. What is that? Do you support that? Does that make you nervous? How do you feel about that? She's really young. She said, well, at first I didn't love it. I didn't love it at all, but he's just become a beautiful person, and I love the person he's becoming, and I'm actually somewhat supportive. So then I say, Suparna, what do you know about Jesus and about Christianity? Right? Because it was appropriate. And she says, well, what I know I've learned from Akhil, and so we have this really lovely open conversation. Now here's the thing. Let's go back to our 1 to 10 scale. I don't know where Suparna is there. We'll say she's a 4, right? She's not antagonistic, but neither is she a Christian. She's nowhere near being a committed follower of Jesus. We didn't even talk a lot about the Bible. But in that evening, there's not a doubt in my mind that she is finding the company, not just of me, but of Robbie and of my wife. She's looking at Akhil's friends and saying, these are good people. These are good. I feel comfortable. These people are not weird. This isn't some cult. These are good human beings. And so at the close of the night, because we had such a lovely time together, I wouldn't always do this, but it was clearly the right thing to do. I said, Suparna, can I pray with you before we go? What do you think she said?
Yes.
She said, yes, of course. So we have this lovely prayer together, and we give one another all big hugs. It was a great night. It's probably 10:30 at night by now, which is late for me. I'm a bit of a lightweight. And then she says, you listen to me, David. If I ever hear that you are in Sydney and you're not sleeping in my house or eating my food, I will be personally offended.
Amen.
Now I'm going to ask you a question. Success or not success?
Success.
Is that gospel success?
Yes.
That's tremendous gospel success. And afterward, Akil's like, bro, thank you so much. My mom loved it. She loves you. Please go visit her. She's serious. You need to go visit her. She wants to make you this, and she can't wait to, it's just like we have this incredible, really good connection. Now again, nobody sitting in a conference office or even in a pastor's office could measure that. I couldn't show that on a report and say, yeah, I had an incredible conversation with a woman who was a Hindu clinical psychologist from Sydney. That's not, there's no metric. You with me? But that's gospel success. You with me? And I know that because Akil is a committed follower of Jesus and a Seventh-day Adventist, that's a long-term relationship. You with me? So there's no point to go in hard and start burning bridges and come with this strong sales pitch in that situation. No. We got the long-term plan. I'm playing the long game here. You with me? Okay, so that's a very good example. Here's another tool to put in your toolbox then. Be comfortable not knowing everything. That's very important, especially for Seventh-day Adventists. Number 2, admit your ignorance. If you don't know about something, say, hey, I don't know a lot about Hinduism. Can you help me to better understand what it is that you believe? And don't pigeonhole people. If I would have gone in with ready-made answers for her, now it's an interesting thing. If I would have gone in, which would be absurd, I wouldn't do it, but if I would have gone in sort of attacking or raising questions about Hinduism, because that's her family faith and that's her ancestral faith, she would have come to its defense. Right. But when I created a forum to just talk openly and honestly about what she believed, she voluntarily distanced herself as, this is what they teach and this is what they believe, and I do still believe some of that. We had an incredible conversation about the nature of God and what God is like and the nature of reality. And then, of course, by the way, this often happens. When you ask somebody the primary problem, primary solution, that tool that you just put in your toolbox, almost always, if you have been a respectful listener and the conversation lends itself that way, they'll ask you the same question. Almost always. They'll then say, well, what do you think? What do you think the big problem is, and what do you see as the solution? It's just like when Paul was there, right? Hey, do you guys have, hey, brothers, do you have anything you'd like to say? It's like, I was hoping you would ask that question, right? And so what you're going to do is you're going to give a short, concise, simple, understandable answer. This is not the time for a theological disquisition. You're just going to say something like this. And this is what I said to Superna that night. I said, Superna, well, from a biblical perspective, I'm always tying it to Scripture. From a biblical perspective, the big problem facing humanity is sort of all wrapped up in this idea of sin. You've probably heard that word before, sin. Well, you might not know what to think of when you think of that word, so it's probably easier just to think of selfishness. And the Bible portrays the planet and the people that occupy this planet, everything is fundamentally broken because of an orientation to selfishness. And that creates all kinds of social dysfunctions and cultural dysfunctions, and that works itself out in really terrible and tragic ways, sometimes in families, sometimes in nations. But we believe, and Scripture teaches, that the solution to the selfishness problem is that Jesus came to earth to show what living a selfless life looks like, a life of love, a life of other-centeredness. He said that the great commandment was to love God with your heart, mind, and soul, and then to love people sincerely and genuinely, to love your neighbors yourself. You've probably heard that before. And then Scripture teaches that Jesus died on the cross so that we could be forgiven for our selfishness, and that anybody that wants to be forgiven and set free from guilt and shame could come to Jesus and receive that. That's what I said. It lasts about 60 seconds. So if you ask, hey, what do you see? I'm not familiar with Islam. Even if I am, I'll say, as a Muslim, what do you see as sort of the primary problem that's facing the world, and what do you see as its solution? And they'll give you an answer, and you'll be able to detect in that answer if this is what they believe or if they're telling you this is what my religion teaches. Are you with me? And so you'll be able to detect the level of devotion and affinity, theological affinity, that they have for what they're saying. And almost always, if you listen respectfully, they will say, what do you think? And then you've got your prepared answer that's, conversationally appropriate, and it's short. It's 1 to 2 minutes. If they ask questions of clarification, you keep them short. You with me? Okay, so that's a really good example of how to be comfortable not knowing everything, admit your ignorance, and don't pigeonhole people. Now let me tell you the story about Kifa Muhammad. So I worked for a long time in Detroit. And in Detroit, Michigan, you might be aware, it's the largest Islamic population in the United States of America. I worked there for 7 years in northern Detroit. And as a sort of a positive thing about living and working in urban Detroit was that there's incredible Middle Eastern restaurants there, right? It's just awesome. I mean, do we want to go to Grape Leaves, or do we want to go to Lashish? Where do we want to go? And these are almost always owned by Muslim people, right? So we would familiarize ourselves with Muslim people. We ran a ministry called Arise. Well, 2 of our attendees that came to Arise were Australian, and they just got this radical idea, Rodney McCallum and Sam Manello. Hey, we're just going to start visiting mosques. We're going to go to mosques on a Friday and tell them we're seekers and just ask if we can go in. They started doing it. They started attending mosques and getting really incredible experiences that I could spend an hour just telling you about those experiences. The experiences that they had in just creating conversations with Muslim people actually gave rise to a ministry that they created, 2 ministries in fact. One's called People of the Book, and the other one's called AII, or the Adventist Interfaith Initiative, that grew out of Arise in the Michigan Conference, and Rodney and Sam just got really passionate about meeting Muslims and discussing what we believe with them. So they taught me a lot of what I'm going to tell you now. So one of the things that I've learned in my 7 years of interacting with Muslims is if a Muslim asks you if you're a Christian, you think you have a kind of obligation to say yes. Here's the problem. If you say yes, you're a Christian, you're not saying what you think you're saying. You think you're saying I'm a committed follower of Jesus who takes Scripture seriously. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is the Pope is your representative and you support American foreign policy. That's what you're saying. That's not what you think you're saying, but that's what you're saying. Okay? So what I've learned to do and what Sam and Rodney helped me to understand was when I get into a conversation with a Muslim, and by the way, let me just throw this up here. And this has happened to me numerous times. I'm in a park. I was just recently at this thing called Currumbin Currumbin Wildlife Center. We go there. There's this dear Muslim family that's sitting there near me. If I go sit down and they show themselves to be friendly, I'm sitting near them, and a conversation can strike up. Try this. It works a treat. Trust me on this. You just say to somebody, if a conversation, you're standing in line next to somebody who's clearly Islamic, or you're sitting next to them, or they're close to you, say this. Hey, I just want you to know, I'm sorry, I hope this isn't too far. I do not believe everything that I hear in the media about Muslims. I guarantee they will respond positively to you saying that. They'll be like, oh, thank you so much. And then a conversation will erupt. Trust me, try it. Just try it as an experiment. And they will respond so positively to you taking the initiative and just crossing that social barrier and reaching out to them. As the conversation progresses, it's possible, if it lasts long enough, they're going to say to you, are you a Christian? Do not say yes, because you're not saying what you think you're saying. What I learned to say is, I'm an Adventist. And to which they invariably say, what is that? Okay, what is that? Because they don't know what an Adventist is. And then I go down my list, my pre-list, and that is, I say, well, an Adventist is somebody who believes that Messiah is going to return. By the way, Muslims believe that. I don't defile my body with pork or other unclean foods or alcohol or cigarettes. I pray every day. I return at least 10% of my income in charitable donations. In Islam, it's 2.5%. So I return at least 10% of my income. I believe in the coming judgment. And I think that's everything. I think I got everything. To which, without exception, this has happened literally to me dozens of times, this is what I hear. This is what I heard this so many times. Many times I've heard, you're a better Muslim than I am. I kid you not. I say, oh man, you're a better Muslim than I am. Right? So one of